This little guy is a groundhog. Groundhogs are also commonly known as woodchucks. Their scientific name is Marmota monax. Other nicknames include chuck, woodchuck, ground pig, whistle pig, whistler, thick wood badger, Canada marmot, monax, monac, weenusk, red monk, and syphilis. Whoa, that's a lot of nicknames. Although they are often called woodchucks, they didn't get their name from chucking wood. It comes from a Native American name. The Algonquian and Narragansett people called it the Woodchuck. This led to the funny tongue twister, how much wood would a woodchuck chuck if a woodchuck could chuck wood? A woodchuck would chuck all the wood he could if a woodchuck could chuck wood. How fast can you say it? How much wood would a woodchuck chuck if a woodchuck could chuck wood? A woodchuck would chuck all the wood he could if a woodchuck could chuck wood. I think we can go even faster. How much wood would a woodchuck chuck if a woodchuck could chuck wood? A woodchuck would chuck all the wood he could if a woodchuck could chuck wood. One more time.
How much wood would a woodchuck chuck if a woodchuck could chuck wood? A woodchuck would chuck all the wood he could if a woodchuck could chuck wood.
Got you! Groundhogs live in North America and are mammals like us. They are herbivores, meaning they only like to eat plant-based food. In fact, they eat a pound of leafy grasses and other vegetation every day. Sometimes they eat snails and insects on accident. Whoops. Groundhogs have unique teeth. They have 4 incisors that keep growing. They have to grind them down by gnawing. Groundhogs chew on roots and pieces of wood instead of going to the dentist. Groundhogs can get up to 50 centimeters long, including a 15-centimeter long tail. Their weight varies throughout the year, ranging from 5 pounds in early spring to 14 pounds in the fall. Whoa, that's a big weight difference for a little groundhog. Why do they need to do this? Groundhogs gain weight to prepare for hibernation. They hibernate in the winter when it's very cold. This is kind of like a very deep sleep. All their body functions slow way down. Their heart beats slower, and they don't have to eat. They spend the winter safe and snug in a special hibernating burrow. Burrows are very important to the groundhog. This is where they live underground. Groundhogs can dig burrows up to 20 meters long. They have many special burrows, including one kind just for using the bathroom. Groundhogs live in burrows for protection. They have to be wary of predators, meaning animals that like to eat them. Their predators include owls, hawks, coyotes, foxes, and black bears. Did you know that groundhogs will warn each other about danger? Just like prairie dogs, they'll stand up on their back legs, keeping watch, and whistle to alert the rest of the colony. That's where they get the nickname Whistle Pig. Groundhogs can also climb trees to escape predators. Farmers consider groundhogs to be pests because these critters like to burrow under farmland. In fact, farmers, livestock, and tractors sometimes fall into these groundhog holes. Also, other animals sometimes move into a groundhog's old burrow if it moves out. These include rabbits, chipmunks, and snakes. Yikes! If I were a farmer, I would not want to fall into a hole and run into a snake. Baby groundhogs are called pups, and young groundhogs are sometimes called chucklings. Groundhogs reproduce in the early spring after they wake up from hibernating. They give birth to 3 to 5 pups and raise their babies in their burrows. Pups are born blind, hairless, and completely helpless. They stay in the burrow until they have hair and they open their eyes and can see. The pups leave home at around 2 months old. Groundhogs' lifespan is 4 to 6 years, but on average they live only 2 to 3 years. A groundhog has to get very lucky to evade all its predators to live up to 6 years in the wild. We associate the groundhog with spring, and in the United States and Canada we have a special celebration on the 2nd day of February. We call it Groundhog Day. Legend says if a groundhog sees his shadow, he gets scared and goes back into his burrow, meaning we will have more winter. But if he doesn't see his shadow, it means there will be an early spring. This might seem like a silly superstition, but figuring out when warm weather was coming was once very important to farmers, to know when it was safe to plant their new crops. Nowadays, we rely on meteorologists and weather reporters, but we still like to throw a big party every February 2nd to celebrate the groundhog. The most famous groundhog in the world lives in a burrow in Gobbler's Knob, Pennsylvania. His name is Punxsutawney Phil. Every February 2nd, people come from miles around to hear Phil deliver his prediction about the coming of spring. A very special group of humans who speak Groundhogese translate his message for the rest of us. When he's not at Gobbler's Knob, Punxsutawney Phil and his wife Phyllis live in the children's section of the Punxsutawney Memorial Library. Let's have a contest. How much wood would a woodchuck chuck if a woodchuck could chuck wood? A woodchuck would chuck all the wood he could if a woodchuck could chuck wood.
How much wood would a woodchuck chuck if a woodchuck could chuck wood? A woodchuck would chuck all the wood he could if a woodchuck could chuck wood. How much wood would a woodchuck chuck if a woodchuck could chuck wood? A woodchuck would chuck all the wood he could if a woodchuck could chuck wood. How much wood would a woodchuck chuck if a woodchuck could chuck wood? A woodchuck would chuck all the wood he could if a woodchuck could chuck wood.
Are there groundhogs where you live? Do you believe the story behind Groundhog Day? Let us know in the comments if you believe these tiny furry weathermen can predict when spring will arrive. Now it's time to pick the next video from Socratica Kids. Which animals should we learn about next? It's up to you.